Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. This is part of our brand new series on real-life prison escapes, and we hope you'll continue to support and follow along. In today's episode, we'll recount a particularly unique prison break story. Our main character is Shin Chang Wan, a boy born on May 28, 1967, into a poor farming family in Gimji City, North Jeolla Province, South Korea. He had one older sister and two older brothers. Chang-won's childhood was marked by hardship. While he was still in elementary school, his mother passed away from liver cancer. Not long after, his father remarried, and the family welcomed another son, bringing the total to 7 members under one roof. At the time, South Korea was undergoing rapid industrialization and national reconstruction, and poverty was widespread across the country. Chang-won's family situation was no exception. They lived in deep poverty. His father was an alcoholic who often unleashed his anger on Chang-won, leaving emotional and possibly physical scars during his formative years. On top of that, Shin Chang Wan didn't receive a proper education. Although South Korea had implemented a policy of free public education at the time, many schools still demanded money from students under the pretext of donations, not voluntary, but mandatory. Because his family couldn't afford to pay, Chang-won became the target of ridicule and humiliation from both classmates and teachers. The constant abuse at home and school had a lasting impact. With no outlet for his growing frustration, Shin Chang Wan began to rebel, turning into someone who disregarded laws and authority. At the age of 15, he was arrested for the first time, for stealing. And surprisingly, the person who turned him in was none other than his own father. The item he had stolen? A single watermelon. The police reported the incident to his school, and as a result, Shin Chang Wan was disciplined and expelled. At the time, he had only been in high school for 3 months and was still legally a minor. His father now faced 2 choices. 1, bring his son home, try to guide him properly, and plead with the school to allow him to return. Or 2, send him to a juvenile detention center for rehabilitation. Ultimately, his father washed his hands of the responsibility. Despite objections from people around him, he chose to send Chang-won away to the juvenile facility. Chang-won spent some time in juvenile detention, but it did nothing to reform him. In fact, he was often heard saying, "I didn't do anything wrong." After his release, he became even more brazen, committing more and more crimes. He was arrested multiple times for theft and assault. You could say he became a regular at juvenile facilities. Even into adulthood, Shin Chang Wan was in and out of prison, serving short-term sentences for petty crimes. However, it was one particular case that completely changed Shin Chang Wan's life. In 1989, at the age of 22, Shin was no longer satisfied with petty thefts near his hometown. He and 4 friends from the same village traveled to the capital city, Seoul, where the 5-man crew robbed a stationery store. Tragically, during the chaos, one of his accomplices killed the store owner. A few days after the crime, the 4 friends were arrested, and Shin Chang Wan became a wanted fugitive. During his time on the run, he was seriously injured, and after nearly 6 months, he was finally captured. At trial, although Shin Chang Wan was not identified as the mastermind, the case had resulted in a homicide, and he was charged as an accomplice. In the end, he was sentenced to life in prison and incarcerated at Seoul Detention Center No. 2. After serving 5 years there, Shin was transferred to Busan Prison to continue his sentence. This facility, located in Gangseo District, Busan City, was built 160 meters deep, surrounded by 4.5-meter-high concrete walls, and maintained a 24-hour security rotation. It was specially designed to house dangerous criminals, and by the time Shin Chang Wan arrived, no one had ever successfully escaped from it. Upon his arrival, Chang-won was placed in cell number 26, a single-occupancy room with very basic furnishings. Near the cell door was a small bed, and in the corner was a toilet. Just imagine, spending the rest of your life confined in that tiny space. It was a horrifying thought, and the only possible way out was through escape. After spending some time at the new prison, Chang-won realized that some of the guards didn't follow proper protocols and frequently used violence without reason. The brutality and abuse pushed Chang-won to start seriously considering an escape plan. But escaping from Busan prison wasn't going to be easy. The facility had a large number of guards, and its security was notoriously tight. No one had ever broken out before. Still, Shin Chang Wan was not someone who gave up easily. His years in incarceration had taught him how to observe. He took every chance he could to watch his environment and study the guards' schedules. Even while lying on his bed at night, he would quietly think through what objects inside the prison might help him. Eventually, he noticed something. Above the toilet in his cell was a ventilation shaft, though it was blocked by iron bars. Still, Chang-won believed that if he could get through that vent, he might be able to crawl through the air duct and eventually reach the outside. From that moment on, he began to formulate a methodical plan to make it happen. In prison, Shin Chang Wan was considered a model inmate, and he made it his goal to rank among the top-performing prisoners. That status would earn him more unsupervised time and greater freedom of movement within the facility. As you may know, inmates are typically assigned to various work programs during their sentence. Chang-won was assigned to work in the woodworking shop, which became the first practical skill he learned in prison. He worked diligently and obediently, gradually earning the trust of both guards and staff. When no one was watching, Shin Chang Wan secretly swiped a saw blade and hid it in the gap beneath the rubber sole of his shoe, smuggling it back to his cell without raising any suspicion. The ventilation duct inside his prison cell wasn't very large, 32 centimeters wide and 28 centimeters high. It was reinforced with 2 vertical iron bars, each 1.5 centimeters in diameter. Shin knew that sawing through those bars with such a small blade would be extremely difficult. But more importantly, he had a serious problem: the sound. Cutting metal would create a loud noise that could easily alert the guards. So, Shin came up with a clever solution. He decided to carry out the sawing between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. each day, during the inmates' recreation time. During those hours, music was usually playing, providing the perfect cover to mask the sound of the blade. Shin was calculated and disciplined. He limited himself to just 20 minutes of sawing per day, never rushing. The rest of the time, he chatted casually with other inmates and guards to avoid drawing attention. After each sawing session, he carefully plugged the cut with chewing gum to make sure it wasn't noticed during inspections. Months passed, and his slow, meticulous work went undetected. But a new problem emerged. His body was too bulky to fit through the narrow duct. Still, Shin didn't give up. He started a strict diet to lose weight. He exercised hard every day to burn calories, while eating only minimal amounts of food, just enough not to raise suspicion. When questioned about his eating habits, he told people, "I'm constipated and lost my appetite." In the next 2 months, his weight dropped from 80 kilograms to 65. At the same time, the metal bars were finally sawed through completely after 4 months of careful work. Once his body slimmed down, Shin tried crawling into the duct, and to his relief, he fit. Everything was now in place. All he needed was the right moment. But escaping the prison compound was the hardest part. The facility was heavily guarded, and watchtowers were manned by officers on a rotation schedule. He had to find a way to avoid their line of sight. Fortunately, construction had recently begun on a chapel inside Busan prison. The site was a messy, chaotic work zone, exactly what Shin needed. The construction zone created a blind spot in the guards' visibility. That became his golden opportunity. And so, after 8 long years behind bars, the day finally came. It was Monday, January 20th, 1997, and Shin Chang Wan was just 29 years old. As night fell, the lights across the prison dimmed, and the inmates drifted off to sleep. Spotting his moment, Shin quickly got up. He folded his blanket into the shape of his body, draped it over his pillow, and arranged it to look like he was still lying in bed. Then he moved toward the ventilation duct, removed the sawed-off bars, and took them with him as tools. He slipped inside the vent, disappearing into the dark. The prison was dead silent. Shin was tense. He could hear the pounding of his own heart and the sharpness of every breath. Crawling slowly through the air duct, he did everything he could to avoid making a sound. Even the smallest noise could alert someone and ruin months of preparation. After inching his way forward for a while, he finally reached a spot outside the cell block wall. The ventilation opening on that wall was 3.4 meters above the ground, higher than a single-story building. But at that point, Shin Chang Wan didn't care anymore. He clenched his teeth and leapt fearlessly to the ground. After quickly scanning his surroundings to make sure no one was around, Shin Chang Wan sprinted to the edge of the construction site. There, using the 2 iron bars he had sawed off earlier, he began furiously digging a hole, burrowing 30 centimeters into the dirt like a madman. Once he cleared the hole, he slipped through and emerged inside the construction site. It was late at night, and the site was deserted. No security, no workers, just darkness. The perfect cover. Chang-won climbed onto a scaffolding frame, found a steel cable, and with determination and agility, scaled the prison's 4.5-meter-high wall. Against all odds, he had successfully escaped. The entire tense, breathless breakout took nearly 90 minutes. After breaking free, Shin Chang Wan exhaled a quick breath of relief and moved on to the next phase. Despite years of incarceration, his skills as a thief hadn't dulled. He found a farmhouse just 500 meters from the prison, where he stole some clothes, a bit of cash, and a bicycle. With that, he pedaled all the way into the heart of Busan, passed through several towns, and eventually made it to the capital, Seoul. Luckily for him, no one noticed his absence overnight. That bought him precious time. It wasn't until the next morning, during routine head count, that a guard realized something was wrong. Prisoner Shin Chang Wan, cell 26, gone. When news of the Busan prison escape broke, it sent shockwaves across South Korea. The public was stunned and alarmed. People began to fear for their own safety and harshly criticized the prison for its lack of oversight. In truth, there had been negligence, but no one ever imagined Shin Chang Wan would pull off a jailbreak like this. Once in Seoul, Chang-won initially wanted to put his carpentry skills, learned in prison, to good use and find an honest job. But he quickly realized that wanted posters with his face were everywhere. The authorities had even placed a 5 million won bounty on his capture. That made it impossible to show his face in public. He had no choice but to resort to stealing once again to survive. After a while, he left Seoul and fled to Cheonan, a city in South Chungcheong province. One day, Shin Chang Wan wandered into a local coffee shop alone. At the time, some cafes in South Korea offered companion services where staff would sit with customers to talk, play games, or keep them company. That day, a cafe employee named Jimn approached him and asked, "Would you like someone to sit with you and have a cup of coffee?" Chang-won looked at her and asked, "Are you feeling sick? You don't look well." The woman was taken aback. No customer had ever asked about her well-being before. She replied, "Maybe I'm catching a cold. You've got a sharp eye." And with that simple exchange, a conversation began. Not long after, Shin Chang Wan even bought cold medicine for her. The gesture touched Jimin's heart, and their relationship quickly blossomed. After several dates, the two were deeply in love, but Jimin had no idea. Her charming new boyfriend was actually a nationally wanted fugitive. After some time, Chang-won confessed his true identity, revealing that he was on the run, and shared the painful story of his escape and life in hiding. He had no stable place to live, drifting from town to town. Surprisingly, Jimn showed deep compassion for her boyfriend. She didn't care about Shin Chang Wan's past and even invited him to move in with her. From that point on, the two began living together. Shin and his neighbors got along well. Whenever he came back from fishing, he would gift them some of his catch. Eventually, they even hosted a rooftop barbecue together. During the day, Chang-won continued wandering the streets and surviving by stealing. But nearly 9 months after his escape, in October 1997, he had a close call. That day, he visited a car wash he often frequented. Despite the heat, he wore a long-sleeved shirt and a vest to hide his tattoos. After getting the car washed, he paid 10,000 won for the service and tipped another 10,000 won to each worker, an unusually generous gesture. That act raised the suspicions of the car wash owner. Something didn't feel right. The owner decided to call a friend who worked as a police officer. When the officer got the tip, he saw this as a perfect chance to boost his record, so he headed straight for the area where Shin was known to hang out. Using recent traces, the police found a photo studio that Shin had visited just a few days earlier, and there, they discovered a photo of Shin Chang Wan. After confirming the fugitive's identity, officers began tracking down his and his girlfriend's residence, a second-floor apartment unit in a residential building. When the first officer arrived at the building, he saw no lights on inside the unit. It seemed no one was home. At the time, Shin Chang Wan was out stealing. The officer waited quietly in the pitch-dark hallway through the middle of the night. Suddenly, footsteps echoed up the stairwell. Someone was approaching. As soon as the man came into view, the officer recognized him as Shin Chang Wan. He immediately raised his air gun and fired. Shin was caught off guard. He didn't have time to dodge. The shot hit him in the right eye and the head. The weapon used wasn't lethal. It relied on high air pressure meant to stun and knock someone unconscious, not kill. But Shin's overwhelming desire for freedom kept him conscious. Despite being dazed and injured, Shin mustered all his strength, broke free, and disappeared into the night. That night left him with a permanent scar over his right eye. After the incident, police turned their attention to Jimn. She claimed she was completely innocent, stating that she had no idea about Shin's true identity. Faced with her testimony and lacking evidence to the contrary, the police had no choice but to release her. Yet, the close call did not break their bond. Shin and Jimn continued to stay in contact secretly, despite the enormous risk. However, Shin eventually decided it was time to leave Cheonan. He asked Jimn, "Would you be willing to travel from place to place with me on the run?" But Jimin's demeanor suddenly changed. She replied, "I'm not a criminal. Why should I have to suffer like that?" And with that, even though their feelings for each other remained, they had no choice but to part ways. A few days later, Shin Chang Wan called Jimn, asking her to help pack up his belongings. That's when Jimn finally discovered the real reason behind their breakup. Shin had found a new girlfriend. Her name was Jiang. She was only 21 years old, younger than Jimn, and the two had already moved in together. Meanwhile, Jimn was still grieving, heartbroken and betrayed. She never imagined Shin Chang Wan could be so cold. It seemed like he had already lined up a backup before leaving her. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became, but she suppressed her rage and agreed to his request. They arranged to meet at a parking lot in the city of Cheonan. That night, Jimn arrived early and waited in the lot. Before long, Shin drove up, parked, and began walking slowly toward her car. But just as he approached, a surprise ambush unfolded. Two plainclothes police officers emerged from the back seat of Jimin's car and attempted to arrest Shin Chang Wan. He was shocked and terrified. He had never expected Jimn to betray him, but Shin didn't surrender easily. He resisted fiercely. During the struggle, one of the officers pulled out a firearm, but as fate would have it, the gun jammed. In that split second, Shin yanked Jimn out of the driver's seat, and the two of them fled the scene together. The entire encounter left Jimn in a state of guilt. She realized she had been used. Yet Shin didn't scold her. He understood that everything that had happened was a result of his own choices. From that moment on, the two went their separate ways, and never crossed paths again. Shin then took off in Jimin's car, once again escaping the police, adding another successful getaway to his record. One might wonder, why were there only 2 officers assigned to capture a fugitive of this magnitude? Perhaps they were simply hoping to claim the 5 million won reward themselves. Regardless, they failed. However, inside the car, police made a valuable discovery. A large amount of cash, luxury watches, jewelry, and other stolen items, all believed to have been taken from wealthy neighborhoods in Cheonan. Beyond the stolen goods, they also found a wig, several stolen ID cards, a few fake license plates, and most notably, a diary. This notebook detailed Shin Chang Wan's activities after the escape, including multiple encounters with police over minor violations during his time on the run, such as driving a car with illegally tinted windshields and smoking in no-smoking zones. Every time he was stopped, he remained calm and flashed a stolen ID, and the officers never bothered to closely compare the photo with his actual face. The diary also revealed that Shin Chang Wan had used underground routes to evade the police. In response, authorities launched an extensive search operation through the sewer systems near Gangnam and Mount Daemo, but the manhunt yielded no results. During the years he was on the run, the bounty on Shin Chang Wan's head kept rising. What started as 5 million won was soon raised to 10 million and eventually skyrocketed to 50 million won. It became the highest reward ever offered by the South Korean police in the history of criminal investigations. Over 900,000 personnel, including military forces, were mobilized in the effort to capture him. His escape trail stretched across the entire nation, turning him into a household name and a national obsession. During this time, Shin Chang Wan committed a series of thefts, repeatedly embarrassing the police. Several high-ranking officers were even disciplined for their continued failure to capture him. This led the public to ask, how could the police invest so many resources and still fail to catch him? One officer who had previously faced off with Shin remarked, "He has incredible stamina and agility. During pursuits, he could maneuver around obstacles effortlessly. His skills were on par with professionally trained officers." With each successful escape, Shin's experience and instincts only grew sharper. Moreover, Shin Chang Wan had a strong and steady mindset. In past encounters with police, even when being stopped, he remained completely calm. During his time on the run, he survived in brutal conditions, sleeping under bridges and even eating rats. These experiences hardened him, making him nearly impossible to track down. He was also known to be a ladies' man. Beyond Jimn and Jiang previously mentioned, Shin had numerous other girlfriends while on the run. Most of them were waitresses or cafe workers from ordinary backgrounds. What's more shocking is that nearly all of them knew his true identity, that he was a wanted fugitive. Yet they never turned him in. In fact, many willingly helped him evade capture. In return, Shin treated them well. He showered them with luxury gifts and looked after them with great care. According to police investigations, others who had received help from Shin also returned the favor by assisting in his getaways multiple times. While on the run, Shin Chang Wan was involved in over 100 burglaries, with the total stolen amount reaching nearly 10 billion won. Most of his victims were wealthy homeowners. Yet instead of hoarding the money, Shin blew it recklessly on himself and his lovers. At the same time, he also donated part of the stolen money to nursing homes, orphanages, churches, and other institutions in need. In some cases, he even personally visited these places, playing with children in orphanages. It was only in those moments that Shin claimed he felt free, no longer a criminal, just a human being. As the media continued to report on his exploits, Shin Chang Wan's public image shifted. He was no longer just a runaway convict. He was now seen by many as a kind of folk hero, stealing from the rich to help the poor. In street interviews, many people voiced support for Shin. Some young people even idolized him. One interviewee even said, "My mom adores Shin Chang Wan. She hopes he never gets caught." This growing public sentiment was soon labeled the Shin Chang Wan syndrome. It swept across South Korea, putting the police in a deeply unpopular position. The force felt humiliated and angry, which only intensified their determination to catch him. In response to growing public scrutiny, criticisms were also aimed directly at the force. In one case, an undercover officer, desperate to earn recognition, used violence against one of Shin's girlfriends during an investigation. After the incident came to light, the officer was immediately dismissed. Shortly after, a civilian contacted the authorities with a tip. "I've found Shin Chang Wan's whereabouts." But after further investigation, the police discovered the man in question wasn't Shin at all. Still, the tipster insisted he was entitled to the reward. The matter was taken to court, and in a surprising twist, the court ruled in his favor. He was awarded the full 50 million won bounty. During the investigation, a series of controversial incidents took place. At one point, the police spread an unverified rumor that Shin Chang Wan was armed in an effort to heighten the perceived threat he posed. At the time, many local officers lacked proper weapons training, and when they heard he might be carrying a gun, they became afraid. There were even rumors that some officers had recognized Shin but didn't dare attempt an arrest out of fear. It wasn't until 2.5 years after his escape, on July 16, 1999, that a sudden turn of events finally brought the manhunt to an end. That day, a plumber called the police, claiming he had spotted Shin Chang Wan in an apartment building. As it turned out, the plumber was a former military intelligence officer, trained with sharp observational skills. That day, he had entered a residential apartment building to perform repairs. While working, he sensed something was off. A couple lived in the unit, but there were no photos of them together, and the man wore a hat and kept his face obscured, avoiding conversation and eye contact. The plumber couldn't shake the feeling that the man looked familiar, eerily similar to the famous fugitive broadcast on national television, Shin Chang Wan. To confirm his suspicions, the plumber pretended he had forgotten a tool and returned to the apartment for a second look. Then he ran to a nearby real estate office to check the tenant records and discovered that the apartment was leased under a woman's name. At the time, South Korean society was still fairly traditional, and home leases were typically under the man's name. Putting the pieces together, the plumber was convinced the man he saw was Shin Chang Wan. When the police received the tip, they quickly mobilized to act. A team was sent to Building 104 in the Daechu Park complex. Officers secured all exits and surrounded the unit. Then, they knocked on the door and asked the man inside, "Are you Shin Chang Wan?" There was a moment of hesitation. Shin seemed to realize that this time he had run out of options. But instead of resisting, he remained calm and quietly replied, "Yes." The sting operation was a success. After 907 days on the run, Shin Chang Wan was finally captured. At the time of his arrest, the bounty had risen to 55 million won. When asked by a reporter how he felt, Shin smiled and said, "I feel relieved." On the day of his arrest, Shin was wearing a flashy floral shirt, a designer piece from the famous Italian brand Missoni. Once the photo of his arrest was made public, that very shirt became a fashion trend, with people scrambling to buy the same design. The exact model of shirt sold out across the country within days. So why did someone as cautious as Shin Chang Wan slip up this time? It turns out that in the weeks prior, Shin had been preparing to get married, but tensions with his girlfriend over money had left him emotionally distracted. That stress caused him to lower his guard, which allowed the plumber to grow suspicious, and ultimately led to his capture. At that time, many people hailed Shin Chang Wan as a Robin Hood. They believed his actions, stealing from the rich to help the poor, were a form of justice. Some citizens even voluntarily wrote letters calling for amnesty, hoping the court would show leniency. Such a scene was unprecedented in South Korean society. However, despite public support, the court couldn't view Shin as a hero. Under the law, everyone who commits a crime must be punished. In the end, Shin Chang Wan received an additional 22 years and 6 months in prison, which, added to his original life sentence, meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Many felt the sentence was too harsh. Some argued that the police were simply seeking revenge for the humiliation Shin had caused, but others believed that he deserved to be punished for his crimes. Putting aside the debates over his sentence, something remarkable began to happen. Although Shin had dropped out of school at a young age, after his first imprisonment, he went back to studying. By the time of his second incarceration, he had undergone a complete transformation and became a model inmate. In 2004, Shin passed the high school equivalency exam and chose to study law and psychology. He hoped to use his legal knowledge to fight for his own rights and apply psychology to help others dealing with emotional trauma, as he once did. By 2009, 10 years after returning to prison, Shin discovered that the facility wouldn't allow him to send mail. So he studied the relevant legal codes himself and filed a lawsuit demanding 3 million won in damages. A year later, When a journalist tried to interview him and the prison refused access, Shin sued again and won another 1 million won in compensation. In one of his public statements, Shin exposed several illegal acts by the police. He claimed he had once bribed an officer and also accused another of sexually assaulting his girlfriend. According to media reports, around 50 officers were punished for misconduct, and about 20 were put on trial for corruption and abuse of power. From that point on, Shin began to demonstrate genuine change. He devoted himself to helping others and fighting for inmates' rights, earning a reputation for perseverance and reform. But in May 2023, around 8 p.m. one evening, Shin Chang Wan attempted suicide in prison. He was discovered in time and rushed to the hospital, but suffered brain damage. It's believed the cause may have been the death of his father, who passed away in July the year before. Though he hadn't been a good father, he was the only person who ever visited Shin after his second imprisonment. While in prison, Shin wrote a memoir titled 907 Days. Once published, it captivated the public. Readers began to gain a deeper understanding of the complex psychology behind the man. They were surprised to discover that Shin was actually a gifted writer, capable of raw, powerful prose. One passage reads, "To catch me, they even mobilized the military and spent a fortune. But the truth is, I didn't have to become this person. Back in elementary school, if just one teacher had taken a moment to touch my heart and say, 'You're a good kid,' maybe I wouldn't have ended up like this." In 5th grade, a teacher yelled, "What are you doing here, kid? You've got no money. Get out of my class." That's when the demon entered my soul. In the final pages of his memoir, Shin Chang Wan pleaded with society to treat troubled youth with compassion and care so that others wouldn't follow his path into crime. His story sparked deep reflection about the hidden causes behind youthful rebellion and the responsibility society bears in preventing it. He also called on readers to care for the marginalized, to lift them up and help them escape a life of crime. Then, at the age of 56, Shin Chang Wan attempted suicide a second time. Once again, he was rescued in time. Since then, his life story has been adapted into comics and television dramas, though public opinion about him remains deeply divided. Still, through his book, it's clear. This man repented. He changed. But in the end, law is the boundary of morality, and anyone who crosses it must be held accountable. After following this story, I was struck by a whirlwind of emotions: shock, sorrow, and awe. But what lingers most is a sense of empathy and respect for the turbulent life of this man. And what about you? What do you think of Korea's Robin Hood, Shin Chang Wan? Let's talk in the comments below. Until next time, goodbye and take care.